Jasper Sharp, as an Asian film fanatic, what is your reaction to Parasite's Oscar victory?
I think it's quite amazing to think that having followed South Korean films since like the turn of the millennium, the idea that we'd get to a situation where Hollywood, which is basically the Oscars, are purely a celebration of North American Hollywood cinema, as far as I could see. So the idea that we get not only a foreign language Oscar, not only an Asian Oscar, but a South Korean one. I mean, I find it absolutely flabbergasting.
It's true, yeah.
And I think it's interesting because the actual, what everyone thinks about the Oscars, the actual clout that you get from like a prize win like that. Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult for foreign language cinema just to get widespread distribution in the UK at the moment. I heard someone was like, a friend of mine that I knew from when I was doing a PhD, he now, is living in a place called Frome, which is a really small, tiny little town in the West Country. And he goes, I never thought I'd see a South Korean film in the local Frome cinema. Uh-huh. And this is the sort of thing. I remember when I came back from Japan in about 2005, there was that whole thing where in the multiplex you had stuff like Lust Caution and Hero and a lot of Asian stuff was making it through. And then suddenly we thought, this is a breakthrough, it's happened. And then nothing. So I don't know, I think...
Maybe this is it. I see a lot of listicles of like South Korean movies you might have missed. And,
which is cool. Yeah. It brings the attention back. We might not agree with all the choices, but I think as a starting point to explore...
Get a conversation going.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's great. I mean, probably my parents don't know much about cinema, but the whole idea that anyone would watch a South Korean film in the first place to them would be just so...
All right.
Out there, So I think we've come a huge way, like in terms of acknowledging that there are big regional film producing places in the world that aren't in North America.
Yes. So shifting gears a little bit, what can you say about the Arrow Video Box Set, Solid Metal Nightmares, the films of Shinya
Tsukamoto.
There we go.
Oh, Shinya Tsukamoto is one of those directors that you've got to remember, like in the 80s and 90s, no one was really talking about Japanese cinema until like there was this big renaissance, and Tsukamoto and Kitano pretty much spearheading this new wave. And thank you. Tsukamoto, Tetsuo came out in 89, 90, and I remember I had no sort of perception at the time of what Japanese culture was or Japanese cinema, but this arrived like a bomb in the cinemas. It's like completely 16mm lo-fi do-it-yourself movie with these crazy stop-motion animation sequences, and I presume Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's this idea of like a man just transforming into metal and just completely narrative-free piece of punk cinema, really, and
it's visually incredible.
Yeah, and I think it articulates something really as certainly how I remember that turn of the late 80s and 90s when we were sort of going in from this sort of economic boom of the 80s to this sort of recession. I mean, I was at university in Liverpool, which is like this sort of decaying sort of former dock, very much of mass unemployment and faded grandeur. But, that was I would say, like, massive centre of rave culture at the time and the underground music scene, and this reminds me of just like all these parties where people just move in and have these big rave parties in former industrial warehouses and things. And this pretty much was around the same time Tetsuo 2 came out, so I think it sort of reminds me of this sort of almost to reclaim the streets, like the basically had this big financial collapse, and then this is it, new voices in cinema, new voices in music, completely resetting the clock. So one hopes now that in the state of the world we find ourselves in now, that we're due for another scenario like this again. But,
and the box set's good. Like, have you seen?
Well, it's the massive, high def scans. I mean, I've done liner note essays for Snake of June, Vital, and Haze and Kotoko. So what you're doing is you're seeing it's basically all Tsukamoto's self-produced stuff. So there's a couple of films missing, like Hiroko the Goblin and Gemini, but you're getting a nice sweep of like seeing how his career has evolved over the over a 20-year period, from these really early sort of 16mm experimental sort of articulation of man at odds with his urban environment, to these more metaphysical works like Vital, which is all about this medical student who's mourning the loss of his girlfriend in a traffic accident, and then she turns up on his mortician slab as part of his dissecting class, so he gets to sort of rediscover his memories of her by basically taking her apart.
Oh my God.
So it's quite an interesting, sort of almost romantic view of like what's the difference between your meat and spirit, and what do you fall in love with? Is it the body or the mind? But done in a very like graphic, well, not graphic terms, but just it's sort of got an interesting idea of like exploring these taboos within this idea of like a quite romantic love story, but done in it as an autopsy.
Good God. Well, I saw Killing, his most recent work, and I thought that was a pretty interesting film, and I'm glad that it got included in this.
Yes, that's great it's getting included. I mean, we get a nice wide range of films. There's some sad omissions, but
8 movies is still pretty good.
it's good. I mean, yeah, and it's anything that gets his work out there. And what I like about his stuff, there's a real consistency of vision there, and you see a progression in his thoughts, but basically he's covering very similar ideas the whole time. Masses of extras. I worked with Sarah. We worked on a video essay for the set as well, which basically we explore the visual style and the sound style of these various tropes that you can sort of identify across his career. So so that's
sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So one thing you and I have in common, beside our unending love of movies, is this is our first time in Berlin.
Yes.
So what do you think of the city so far?
Pretty amazing. I mean, I know Germany pretty well, but I've been. I tend to go very frequently to a festival called Nippon Connection in Frankfurt, which is like a big showcase of Japanese cinema. That there's a sort of parallel history with Midnight Eye, our website, and that we both started at the same time. The difference is, of course, Midnight Eye stopped in 2015, whereas Nippon Connection is still going strong. But I mean, I know Frankfurt very well. So I know Germany pretty well, but this is very much the first time I've been in Berlin. I'm fascinated by the history. I mean, obviously the wartime history, and you see the traces of the Brandenburg Gate just down the road, but then you've got whole areas which are completely bombed up and reconstructed. So I think it's fascinating trying to imagine what Berlin 100 years ago would have looked like, for example.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I'm fascinated by that whole, the whole Weimar Republic. You're used to all the Ufer films and Pabst Diary of a Lost Girl. I don't know, this idea of like the 1920s German decadence, I think is so sort of seductive, and it's really interesting to think we're here where that all happened.
It's incredible. Napoleon and Hitler walked the streets here.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
So, okay. So what can you tell me about Anime One, the movies of hers that you think people should watch first?
Right, so a bit of history, yes. So Anime Wong this is an ongoing project I'm working on now, which is Anime Wong, the very first Asian American movie star in Hollywood, but she spent a lot of time in Europe, first arriving in I think it was 1927, 1928. I mean, she came via Berlin and then went to London, and she made 3 silent films which are really good: Song, Piccadilly, and Pavement Butterfly. And Piccadilly's the best known of them, and I've screened Song and Pavement Butterfly. They're basically German productions. But they only exist as prints. I mean, no one has put them out on DVD or Blu-ray, so there are prints of these films in the British Film Institute National Archive. So the only way I get to see them is by actually screening them myself. These I feel like typical German films where, like, it's like Anime Wong plays this sort of, she obviously is this exotic Asian American, but unlike the American silent films she was in, I don't think there's a politicized dimension to the same. Her roles in the American films she was playing, like, prostitutes or I don't know, dragon ladies, or just very stereotypical characters. And I think she's just casted these sort of bits of exoticism in songs. She plays this sort of knife thrower's assistant who arrives, is taken in by this insane knife thrower after she's washed up in Istanbul after her ship was wrecked. And so it's never really, her ethnicity is never really, we know she's foreign, we know she was get washed up on the shore, and she lives in this sort of very exotic carnivalesque milieu. And a similar thing in Pavement Butterfly. I mean, she basically, I don't remember the story, I haven't seen Pavement Butterfly for about 10 years, but it is chased by this mad clown through the streets of Saint-Tropez and stuff all the time. It's a very sort of weird films. Piccadilly was filmed in London. That was her first British production, and in that it's more a celebration of late 20s British nightlife when she plays this exotic nightclub dancer. Well, she basically gets this favourite treatment from the guy who owns this nightclub. They're losing money and their dancing act isn't very good, so he goes down into the scullery and sees Anna May Wong dancing on the table and thinks, well, she's great, let's try and make her the star of this nightclub act. And of course it has this great result, and he falls in love with her, and then disaster happens at the end with jealous lovers cropping up. And it's a fascinating film, and I think it captures that sort of late 20s decadence I was talking about from Berlin.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and I've been just basically going through newspaper clippings. I mean, she was based in London for a couple of years, and she did lots of tours of Europe, so trying to work out exactly where she was at any one time. I mean, she did this whole one-woman show where she toured all the way across Britain, going to all these strange places like Newcastle and Leeds and Sheffield and Plymouth and Wales, and it's just trying to get an idea of what people would make of this. I mean, there were no famous British Chinese stars at the time, so what I think is really interesting is the discourse surrounding her, that she was an exotic actress from Hollywood who happened to be Chinese, but she had to be representative of being Chinese and of being from Hollywood at the same time. So this funny conflicting identity, and the way she was received in Britain and Europe was very different from the way she was treated in Hollywood at the time.
Wow. And you've been researching her for a long time, right?
Yeah, good old 10 years. And it's good. I've got lots of files, and I keep meaning. I haven't had a chance to. That's the thing I'm working on, is transforming this in some sort of a
Something's
book.
going to happen.
Something's going to happen. Just waiting till critical mass, and then it's going to all spill out.
Exciting. So, could you say if you're working on some Toru Ishii releases?
Yeah, so we do some work with Arrow, say the Tsukamoto Box Set, and I don't want to announce, there's lots of stuff they've got in the pipeline. We know it's like the Tokyo Olympics this year, 2020, so all eyes are going to be on Japan, and there's going to be numerous film retrospectives going on, and they're promoting Japanese culture. But Arrow seems to just, by coincidence or design, seems to be releasing a lot of Japanese stuff there this year. And we've already done, I'm working on these in terms of doing commentaries and liner notes, along with Tom Mez from Midnight Eye, and also people like Patrick Macias and Mark Schilling. Seems to be the same regular batch of collaborators all doing different things. But we've had quite a few Teruo Ishii films over the years, like Horrors of Malformed Men, and what have we had? Yakuza Law, Lynching. So I don't think I'll be getting
some more stuff.
There's some more stuff. Well, let's say there's
Arrow's going to have some Japanese releases that you're going to be involved
in. And the
in.
Teruo Ishii there's a lot of Teruo Ishii coming out, and it's all from that late 60s period of the psychedelic torture movies, basically. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and I don't know, Teruo Ishii is one of those really fascinating directors who was very prolific. He's best known for things like Shogun's Joys of Torture and Horrors of Malformed Men, these sort of erotic, grotesque. But I think, I always looked at him at the beginning. When you just meet these films for the first time and confront them, you find them very shocking and stuff. But I just think that he's a fascinating director in the same way that Ken Russell. He's always has moments. Very important director who has moments of absolute brilliance. But even if his films don't quite meet up to where his own sort of expectations or whatever, they're always fascinating, and that he was doing very different stuff from what other directors were doing.
All right. So can you tell me about your documentary coming out on mushrooms? A little different.
So About 5 years ago, over 5 years ago now, obviously we did, me and Tim Grabham made a film called The Creeping Garden, which was about slime molds and the scientists that study them and how they're being used to sort of investigate various engineering strategies and computer science and things like that.
Right.
And that came out and did a lot of festivals and now I've been meaning to do something. I mean, my interest in fungus is purely as like a side hobby from film. I think there's some similarities between fungus and mushrooms and film in that this sounds very abstract.
Yeah.
But,
where are we going with this?
Well, right. So so I've been taking too many mushrooms maybe. But I always thought when I was first writing about film, or what attracted me about Japanese cinema, is that you would look at a film and, as my strategy as a critic is to think about how was this made, who watched it, what was their reception to it, and why is it here now? So I sort of find a similar thing. There are like hundreds of, probably tens of thousands of fungus in the UK. No one can really identify, very few people, there's about a handful of people who are actually any good at identifying them properly. But whenever I see them, I sort of think, why is this here? There are different species that like different types of soil and the different climates, different things eat off each other and like, in terms of, I don't know, it's like, why are they here? How are they? I mean, what purpose do they solve? And so it's a similar sort of thing. It's a bit abstract, but, I think, this is what I want to do is probably just basically been shooting lots of pictures of mushrooms and learning about the subject, doing interviews. So this is very much early days yet. It's a work in progress, but really...
I think it's cool you have this other interest.
And also how to... I think a lot of The Creeping Garden, for me, was about how does one go about communicating science and abstract scientific ideas through film, through the documentary form, and what is the best form for communicating science, basically, and sophisticated abstract ideas. And so this is pretty much what we're trying to do. For me, it's like getting my head around about how do you make a film about mushrooms that communicate what mushrooms are and what they do and why they're important in a way that people are going to want to watch it. And maybe the feature-length documentary format might not work in that way. There could be other ways of doing this. So
okay.
So it'll be very abstract at the moment. But basically, it's a work in progress that might always be a work in progress that gets leaked out in dribs and drabs.
We'll see.
Yes, we'll see.
All right, so back to Asia.
Okay.
Is there any chance that Midnight Eye will come back from the dead?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because Tom and I have been talking about this. It only dawned on me the past couple of years when I was doing a lot of either academic conferences or film festivals. A lot of people were coming up to me and going, God, I really miss Midnight Eye.
It's a really good site.
Well, thank you. And I think it was interesting what we were doing. I mean, we never got any money for it at all.
Right.
So it was a gateway into doing other things.
Sure.
And I always considered... Part of it was when I first started working on it, it was like learning about Japanese culture and trying to interpret it through film. And then I lived in Japan and I was sort of closer to the ground. So again, seeing how that culture was developed. I don't have so much of an intimate relationship with Japan as a country at the moment.
Right.
But me and Tom were both saying the reasons for pulling the plug on it like 5 years ago were that there weren't many good Japanese films coming out.
Okay.
I still don't think there are. I don't think
Fair enough.
I'm not as intrigued now by what's coming out as I was, say, 20 years ago.
Sure.
But I don't know if that situation... There's always going to be interesting stuff coming out of Japan. It's a dynamic, big country. Mm-hmm. And you look at the film history, it goes through these stages where it plateaus and gets a bit decadent. Mm-hmm. And then you get some sort of major revolution and it all changes again. So I can't see any reason why that won't happen again. But I think, again, for me and Tom, it's more a case of, we're aware there's an interest, we're aware we had a good brand and that people want to see more from us. So it's a case of how we can do something with that. So Midnight Eye will be reborn. But whether it will be in the situation of being, old-fashioned websites like it was, or whether it will be doing some other form of work on Japanese cinema or other types of cinema.
Sorry, I'll take a Pilsner. Pilsner.
This is different?
This is a white one.
Oh, okay, so you want different.
Yes.
What's the name?
The Pilsner. What is that drink?
Radaburger.
Radaburger. Okay. Great. Sorry, I knew that was going to happen eventually.
Yeah, no, of course, yes.
But, and I'll just bleep that out. So, okay, we got the Midnight Eye
Yes.
stuff out of the way. Okay, so I find your BFI articles very helpful. Is that going to happen too? Like listicles and articles on for the BFI?
I like doing them, actually.
Yeah.
I find, yes, it's I just pitch ideas to them, and if they're interested, they do it, And a lot of my stuff has been Japanese focused, but I always feel slightly frustrated that people just think I watch Japanese films all the time, and I do have interest in other films,
Sure,
so
yeah.
it was nice getting a chance to do stuff like, I don't know, I did Where to Begin with Joseph von Sternberg,
Right,
and
right.
the other one, got his name, Robert Flory, and his directors are really fascinating, embody their time, and where to begin with them and why, it's just,
It's helpful.
it is, yeah. No, I love doing them, and it's a nice way of, I like the liberty of writing for the internet rather than print, because print you're always limited by word count, and so people say, write a 500 word review of this film, and you can't really say very much in 500 words, or so
Too condensed.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even though the BFI articles are, quite strictly, they want to keep it to a certain limit, because I think people nowadays, when they're reading stuff on a phone, they're not going to be continuously scrolling. You have to keep it succinct and accessible. But I like the format, so I do like it. So I'll certainly be doing a lot more of them.
Great. And
Yeah.
how long have you been writing for them? The last one was in December, I believe.
Yeah, I
been
guess
like 2 or 3
when I've
years
been
at least.
writing for Sight and Sound, the magazine, the BFI magazine, for over 10 years now.
Okay.
But never, because a lot of the stuff I like is a bit sort of left field for them. So, so I generally tend to do sort of fairly minor reviews for them. But for the BFI online, it's been about 6-7 years, I think.
Okay, so now that, like we mentioned earlier, that Parasite is the talk of the town, every town, people watch Parasite, and people, like critics and other various people, are recommending other South Korean movies. What are some essential South Korean movies you would like to recommend?
Oh, well, I remember when I first moved to Japan. I mean, I'm not a huge follower of South Korea. I mean, I do consider my focus is purely Japan.
Sure.
Not purely, but primarily.
Right.
But certainly when I moved to Japan in 2002 was when there was that massive upsurge of Korean stuff, and I remember thinking at the time, because Japanese film went through a really bad patch in 2002. We had stuff like Ping Pong, I think, was the best film of the year that I identified, but that wasn't doing particularly anything exciting. But stuff like Memories of Murder, I still think is absolutely amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah, really strong. And another one, because I've seen a lot of these listicles, and they list all a lot of the common, the familiar, usual suspects like
Sure.
Old Boy and stuff. Have you ever seen Oasis?
No.
Oh man, it's so good. It's about this sort of real scummy, sort of down and out sort of reprobate of a character who has always trouble with his family stuff, but he ends up kidnapping a girl with cerebral palsy,
Oh my
and
God.
but it's done as almost like a love story. I mean, there is throughout the whole thing. No one else likes this guy, and no one else really gives her a second look. So there's sort of, you
So
develop
she's
this
sort of flattered that she was kidnapped.
so it sort of sounds wrong, but it's done in this sort of a naturalistic style.
Sure.
And I thought it's certainly one of the strongest South Korean films I saw at the time. I love sort of industries, filmmakers will do stuff like that no one in Hollywood would do that, would they? So I think that's a great one. Obviously, there's the Tales of Two Sisters, classic. There was a lot of good stuff coming out at that time. I remember it was a really good film. I don't think it was like a romantic comedy. I saw it in Tokyo Film Festival called Marriage is a Crazy Thing, and it was like just even they do rom-coms really well, Koreans as well. You know,
Yeah.
it's all these different genres. I mean, I think it's a lot more commercial and entertainment-oriented than Japanese cinema, but they get it right. When they get it right, they really get it right. So that's the difference.
Okay. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
It was
Well,
lots
thank
of fun. Before I let you go, are there any other projects you would like to plug?
No.
Okay. We covered everything. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much for talking to me.